Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. Welcome to our next live session of Avid Online. And for those who are joining us for the first time, a special welcome to you. Please refer to the chat box for more information on Avid Learning, the work that we do. And we hope you keep tuning in throughout the course of 2021. This year holds so much promise with the new vaccine on the horizon, cultural shifts that began last year, which have now come to fruition, and many more innovations, inspirations, and perspectives to be made and discovered. At Avid Learning, we use the extraordinary circumstances that 2020 brought upon us to innovate and transition our program online seamlessly and inventively. Our digital further learning campaign, Avid Online, began in April of 2020. And over the course of the 9 months, we presented over 150 programs. This year, we hope to continue the support to the arts and maintain our connection with the creative communities and facilitate learning and continuous dialogue with our audiences. So whether we continue our online sessions or transition to physical events or a hybrid of both, we stay true to our mantra that learning never stops. This brings me to our evening session, the changing face of the image, the evolution of film and photography industries, a live session on how the image making industry of film and photography has changed and evolved over the years with the advent of newer technologies and the emergence of fresh artistic perspectives, philosophies, and concepts. Allow me to introduce our very impressive panel. Award-winning photographer and installation artist, Samar Singh Jodha, award-winning filmmaker and photographer, Sooni Taraporevala, Oscar-nominated and 2 times National Award-winning filmmaker Ashvin Kumar, and our moderator for the evening, media expert and ex-head of SEM postgraduate course at Sophia Polytechnic Jeroo Mulla. For more about our very distinguished panel, please refer to their bios that have been pasted in the chat section. They've also been emailed to you earlier. These speakers will examine and discuss how image making industry has changed and evolved with the introduction of new technologies, a shift from analog to digital mediums, changing roles of professionals, and much more. Please note this session will be 75 minutes followed by a 15-minute Q&A in which Jeroo will be taking questions. So please keep them ready. Start posting them in the Q&A box throughout. On that note, thank you once again for tuning in. Over to you, Jeroo, and look forward to a fascinating session. Thank you.
Thank you, Asad. Thank you for having us over. I'd just like to begin by saying that photography and film are two genres that share many synergies and which have both had an interesting history, first being connected to science and various iterations and adaptations of light, then struggling to be recognized as fine art. And now, with the digital age, the concept of what these two fields entail is constantly changing as there are practitioners themselves. Our cell phones are now packing image making tools that surpass the technology of most digital cameras from 15 years ago. The shift from analog to digital photography has elicited diverse reactions from media scholars. While some have written the obituary of photography as the dominant visual medium of the modern world, other scholars see digitization as a means for the continuation or enhancement of this dominant medium. Panelists, I would request you to please share your opening comments on this topic with respect to how the shift from analog to digital mediums has impacted both film and photography. Samar, you could start.
Okay, thanks very much. Hello, everyone. Well, I would say, I think the biggest impact is that earlier photography, at least I can talk about that, it was, people always spoke that it was a democratic art form, but I think unless you were a professional or amateur or a rich guy, you never really went to a camera because you had no clue how to get to, or why would you buy one? I think digital kind of, created what I would call is truly now the democratic art form, where anybody can be a photographer, and their opinion about great picture or not so great picture, that's your personal take.
Sooni?
I'm going to speak about it in a more personal way because I'm old enough that I've seen the shift from analog to digital in all the three things that I do, photography, filmmaking, as well as writing. So in writing, I started out with a manual typewriter that went to a portable, which was state of the art at the time, then to a Selectric with a little ball that you could use for correction, to an electronic typewriter on which I wrote Salam Bombay, to finally the computer. In photography, of course, from analog to digital. And in filmmaking, I made my first film that was Izu on 35mm film and my second film in digital. Now, every stage of technology, for me at least, I've always felt it's state of the art till something else surpasses it. And I think technology is on a relentless forward movement. And I love technology, but I also love analog. And I would like to be in an ideal world where it doesn't have to be either or. And, as practitioners, we can, use both.
Ashwin?
Hi everyone, really nice to be part of the panel. So very much like Sooni, I kind of would like to talk about it a little more personally. Started actually in theater, so very analog, and made the journey into a film editing room, which was a proper Steenbeck editing room where you physically handled the film with your own hands and you had to physically splice it with your own hands. And there was a certain sort of visceral quality about the fact that you were cutting something that was going to be screened, and there was a connection in your hands and your eyes actually there, which was just phenomenal. Also, around the time that I was becoming a filmmaker, the digital world came in, and I ended up having started one of the first digital post-production facilities in India back in 1996, where we brought in an Avid or two, and we started doing transfer from literally transfer from the analog world to the digital world and editing films on digital. Moving on from there to what we have today, where we can film an entire movie on a little chip, which you put into your computer on a laptop and you're editing it on an airplane. Far from the days of the big Avid, where you had, I beg your pardon, the big Steenbeck, where you had to order in reels. It's been a heck of a journey. And I mean, just want to point out that this journey, the evolution between the transition between analog and digital has happened in a very compressed space of literally 15 to 20 years within my professional lifetime. Whereas from the beginning of cinema till that time that transition happened was almost about 100 years. And film hadn't quite changed. I mean, basically films were edited, shot pretty much the same way for those 100 years with a few differences, such as, sound came in and things like that. So what's happened in the last 20 years actually has very exciting sort of ramifications, which we are quite not aware of quite yet. And to top it all off, we then have this proliferation of social media on top of all that, which has changed the way audiences interact with the moving image and the sort of still image. So I think it's a very sort of appropriate time to start talking about these things, because we are kind of in the middle of a change where we don't even know the impact of the previous change, and we're sort of thrown into the throes of the next one.
Ashwin, I'd like to continue to ask you, what are some of the new artistic perspective, philosophies, and concepts that have emerged in the image making industry, and how have they influenced photographers and filmmakers? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, philosophically, if one has to begin with the reason why we tell stories, that doesn't change. I think that stays primal. It stays very much about what stories do to us as a civilization, and how mythologies and the myths that we create as a human species continue to be created. Just the tools change, the medium changes. It comes on a digital device instead of a screen, and it comes on a screen instead of a theater, and instead of theater, it comes around a campfire. The tools don't change. The tools change, but the reason why we tell the stories actually don't. So philosophically, I think we're fine. We're pretty sound actually. The few things that have changed is the way the audiences have started receiving cinema and receiving the moving image. That is something which is very interesting actually, because theater, and even when you talk about a communal campfire with the little society around it in prehistoric times, or you talk about cinema, theater, you talk about any of these are very communal experiences. Today we have a little iPhone which we listen to with headphones on the tube or in the metro going from home to office in the morning, and we're watching a full-length feature film on that. You know, that sort of that somehow was never intended. So in some senses we have a story what we are trying to tell to a community of people, but the gestation of it, and we're in the very early sort of stages of that, the gestation of it from the audience's point of view is slightly different. So philosophically, I think that is the big shift that's happening, the audience point of view, not so much the telling point of view, you know, as it were.
Okay. Samar, that was interesting. Thank you, Ashwin. Samar, how has the image making industry evolved with the introduction of the new technologies? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think the biggest, I would say a shift rather, has been that everybody is literate about photography today. You know, that mystery is gone. And I think that's probably has been the most positive thing, you know, I see as a professional photographer, that, you know, all of a sudden, everybody is making a picture, you know, whether it's a selfie or whether it's on a mountaintop. You know, people are documenting and putting it all in, you know, I mean, yeah, you know, technology, I think on the other side is the consumption, as Ashwin said, that, you know, it's shrunk in this little screen. You know, my mother doesn't let me shoot anything on the phone because she's like, I'll never see these pictures again. You know, I want film because she wants a print, you know. So partly it's not just old school, but, you know, we have, you know, you shoot stuff and you just put it on your phone or on your computer. And how much do we really go back into it? You know, so I think also photography, I would say, suffers from carpet bombing now, you know, like you go and shoot like, you know, 20, 40, 50 pictures. And it's like, okay, I'm going to get something out of it. And that's unfortunately how it is. And no wonder people have, you know, thousands and thousands of pictures on their phone, but, you know, you never revisit it.
Samar, has the art of photography been democratized due to such conceptual and technological shifts?
Yeah, I think one major thing has happened.
Has this impacted the role of the photographer?
Yeah, I think everybody is a photographer, as I keep saying, you know, because it's no more that you had to have, you know, a right brain to be an artist. You know, you can be a guy who's in a hardcore accountant and you can still engage in picture making. And then who am I to decide how good or bad the picture is? Because I think everybody has their own liking. And I think that has created, I mean, I keep saying again and again is that that digital, of course, a digital noise also. But I think on the other side, all of a sudden, everybody is a photographer. Can you just imagine? I mean, before this technology, you just couldn't get close to it because it was too much of a mystery and you had no idea how to load a film for that matter, you know?
Sooni, can you compare the benefits and or drawbacks of older versus newer technologies?
Again, coming to it personally, but not so personally also, film is a very stable medium and it's been proved to be stable. So museums still would prefer silver gelatin prints to digital. Digital is still very new. It hasn't been tested. Is it going to last 40 years, 50 years, 20, 100? Nobody knows. So that's one drawback. But in my life, digital has actually kind of been a savior because some of my negatives had been stored really badly, with a lot of humidity and, you know, not stored well. And in the old days, for me to make prints out of negatives, even if the negatives were pristine, from a 35 millimeter negative, all I could print maximum would be 20 by 24 inches. Now with digital, I had my first show of Parsis in 2013 at Kemal actually. And digital came to my rescue because I was able to digitize my negatives. And I had prints that were 4 feet by 6 feet. So, and of course, taking out all the scratches and, you know, all the years of deterioration. So for me, it's been a savior.
Samar, would you like to comment on the same question, benefits and drawbacks of older versus newer technologies?
Yeah, I think, you know, as I said, there's too much of carpet bombing and less amount of thinking before you hit that shutter. I think analog days you used to, partly because it's expensive too to blow so much of film. I think you put a lot more mind to it. But I think that goes across on any platform. Music, there was a time you wanted to go back home and listen to that specific tune, and now you can have it, on your laptop or on your phone or whatever. So I think, the drawbacks are there, but I think we live in a time where people are on steroids, so they want everything now.
Ashvin, we have seen a renaissance of older technologies and older techniques and technologies in both these industries. Could you discuss this with the example, say, the return of the 35mm film?
Well, I don't know if 35mm film will have a renaissance, unfortunately, and which is actually very unfortunate, because I think the discipline of shooting on celluloid, just there's sort of an electric energy on a set which is shooting on a medium which is running down the counter of the of the money as the film is passing through the camera. That tension and that electricity I miss on digital sets, frankly, because I just feel that now you can pretty much shoot whatever you like and anything you like. So I think me as a director used to prepare a lot before I went into, because every foot of film used to be measured in terms of how many shots and takes you had to do, and especially making films. When I started as a student, etc. Film was really, really very, very the most prized commodity. That is no longer so. So now we do 15 takes, 20 takes, with actors, and I find that to be quite. I find it fatiguing, frankly, both for the set, for the actors, for the crew, and for everyone else. So I think as directors, we have to impose a certain discipline on ourselves not to go beyond 5 to maximum 7 takes, if possible. I mean, of course, in unusual situations. But what digital does, fortunately, is it does gives us the option of not stressing about the fact that we may not have got something, and also digital is a far more lenient medium, I think, than 35 is. In some senses, it does allow you a lot more. I mean, it's far more forgiving. But that's not to say, unfortunately, that forgiveness is then interpreted as, anyone can just do it. Like someone was saying a little while ago, that, now you can shoot full, a film that can come into cinemas on a camera that's about this size, like an A7S with Sony, which is fantastic and it's hugely empowering. But I feel that should impose even more discipline on us as filmmakers to be able to handle that kind of largesse that the sort of format allows, rather than the sort of being indulgent with it and just shooting whatever you can and then leaving it up to the poor editor later on to try and figure out his or her way through these mounds of footage that you've accumulated over your shoot.
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
I don't really think it's the medium as much as how you use it, because for both my films, and I've only made 2 films, the prep was the same, the stress was the same. We did the same amount of takes. We never did any more takes because we were shooting digital. Everything was exactly the same, except that I think with lighting, you have more latitude with digital. And the biggest thing is you can see things immediately, which wasn't there with film. With film, you had to wait to see, rushes like many days later. That was the biggest difference. But in terms of the discipline of filmmaking, you can have it exactly the same way as film, even if you're shooting digital.
Samar, how do post-production technologies and software allow for images to be reimagined?
Well, you can say reimagined or you can say manipulated. I think, depending on what audience you're looking at, if you're doing Fair and Lovely, you can create that post, happy, shiny people kind of a picture. If you're doing selfie, you won't recognize when you actually meet the real person because there's too much of filters and you wonder what happened to you from the picture to real life. But I would say technology has definitely helped bringing costs down. Commercial work, when I would do, I would go to Namibia to shoot a Land Rover there. Today, they wouldn't send me there because they can actually do everything within the studio. So technology commercially, it has definitely, saved a lot of resources. There's no doubt about it. But I think the purity kind of goes away because, you're too much of orchestrating in that darkroom on your computer. And I think the element, what I think the elements in fact, what Ashwin, Sooni were talking about, I think the element of surprise is what image making always was. When you develop that film, and there was like this great surprise, and it's not about perfection, because if it's perfection, then you do mathematics, because that's where logic sits, not in creativity.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, Samar, actually, I've never ever used a video assist. Bizarrely, I always stand right at the camera while I'm looking at my actors, and I mean, it's only if I feel like maybe we didn't get something or something, then I have to go back and do a playback. Because I think coming from the 35 world, we just didn't have the time to do that. Even if we had the opportunity to have a video assist attached to the camera, which would basically recording the footage that you were shooting. And I think that's something that I kind of just have taken away into the digital world as well. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying.
Sooni, how have the mediums of virtual and augmented reality changed the game with the interaction of the image?
I don't think it's changed the game as yet, but it will, because I think the technology is still quite primitive. You still need to wear these glasses, and you can only watch really short stuff. Otherwise, you get giddy. It's not a comfortable experience. But as soon as the technology improves, then it's going to be a game changer, because then you're really going to make that leap into a fully immersive world, which will be quite something.
Okay, this question is for all of you. How do practitioners in both fields attempt, that is photography and film, attempt to find a balance between artistic processes, aesthetics, and the use of technology? You can start, Samar, Sooni, anyone.
How do you find balance? I think, as I said, balance is all depending on what your audience is. If it's a commercial space, you don't have much control over it. If it's personal thing, then obviously, using technology only to either speed up or to save money. But, I mean, these are two areas I can comment on.
Okay. Ashvin, can you
Yeah.
describe the relationship with these two fields, share
Yeah.
with the context of early motion pictures and still photographs? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so if I can just comment on that on
I'm
the earlier one, yeah.
sorry.
Well, basically, the way I look at technology is that technology should be invisible, frankly. It should not be apparent to the person who's watching the film or watching the medium, because that would defeat the purpose of it. Again, it's a tool. We have to understand what we're talking about. For example, in the use of VFX, which now we do more and more, even on normal films, we remove wires, we remove entire buildings, we add crowds, we add all sorts of things, and these are great tools because suddenly you don't have to pay 400 people to show up in costume for a certain set. You can just recreate it in VFX and it looks great. But it needs to be invisible. A great example of things like Gravity, for instance, the movie the movie Gravity, in which, technology really enables him to tell his story in the most emotionally impactful way. And I think at the end of the day, what we're looking for is to make an emotional impact with the audience. I mean, that's the whole essence of what we try to do, is to move audiences emotionally. And I think technology needs to be in the service of that, and not the other way around.
Samar, how do you think?
Can I answer that, Jeroo?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Like Ashvin said, technology is a tool, and whatever technology works to get what you need to tell the story, for me, is good enough. And I love technology. I love the fact that in the old days you needed, aeroplanes, to do aerial shots, and it was really expensive. And now, as an independent filmmaker, you can put a drone up and get the most magnificent footage. I mean, I love it. So yeah, there are lots of drawbacks, but for me, I do confess to love it.
Okay, Samar, how do you think the audience's or viewers' perception towards photography has changed?
Yeah, again, I think, it all depends which venue you are looking at, because I think there's so much of image manipulation that audience has, they'll stop trusting images, because they feel that they've been doctored, they've been, engineered, they've been basically manipulated. And, that's unfortunately a very sad part of it, that when we see images which are shared on, let's say, social media, and then after a day or two, we find out that this was all fake. And, that's just really, but, that's not just photography. I think that just goes across so many different things. But I would still like to believe that, it's photography does win, because everybody's a photographer.
Ashvin, could you describe the relationship that these two fields share in the context of early motion pictures and still photographs?
Well, sure, I'll attempt to. It's a very long history, but in essence, the beginning, I guess, of cinema and photography starts with silver nitrate on a gelatin kind of strip, where light exposed, and then you'd get a black and white kind of, monochromatic image. And coming from that, I mean, that's where the word celluloid comes from, actually, because that was the name of the strip. And then coming from that, moving to what we call film stock, right? Where they made it safer and safer, because those were flammable, and you had many examples, in the famous film Cinema Paradiso. So as late as the 30s, for example, you had film stock that could actually catch flame and ignite. And if anyone's watched Cinema Paradiso, that's what actually happens to one of the main characters in the film. So from there, then it became safer, and it was coated, so there was not flammable anymore, but they were still exposed basically using the principles of light. So we had lens, and we had a piece of film running through a gate of the camera, and the lens would expose the film, and then the film would go off for a development process in a lab, and then it would come back, and an editor would sit and they would splice it, and finally it would go back to the lab. And it was a big process. I mean, there were like many back and forth. The lab was an integral part of this whole thing. Now with digital, we cut short all of that with a short intermediary, where we had a process where we were still shooting on, say, film 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter. Then we had an intermediate process where we would transfer it to digital. We would edit it on digital, and then we would transfer it back onto 35 for the final projection. We got rid of that also in the last, say, 5 to 10 years, when we had the entire world has shifted from 35 millimeter projection to digital projection. So now we go directly from a chip, which is quote unquote exposed, actually not exposed, sort of digitally emblazoned, if you like. A chip is exposed, and then that chip is stuck into your computer, and then you edit everything in your computer. Then it goes to a lab, it gets developed, it sort of gets post-produced at a lab at a very high resolution, and then that's it, So we've cut out the entire chemical process, if you like, out of the entire photographic. It used to be a photochemical process. Now we have a photo-digital process, which has cut out the entire chemistry out of it. So, but funnily enough, we are still left with the we're sort of anachronistically left with the sort of remnants of the old days. We still talk about, many of the terms that we still use in digital, whether it is, I mean, things like f-stop, for instance, hasn't changed. Things like shutter speed hasn't changed. So these are basic things to do with lensing and with light and manipulation of how much light needs to be let into the camera in order to make an image. That stuff hasn't really changed. What has changed is the way we kind of project, the way we consume, and the way we manipulate these images. And especially now with visual effects, you add a whole other dimension, because since we are dealing in pixels, you can manipulate pixels, which is what VFX is all about, and SFX is all about. You manipulate pixels to actually create things, and you create avatars within films. So now you have entire films which don't have actors in it, and have basically creatures which are created. Like, for example, the tiger in Life of Pi, every hair has been created in a computer, and you see the result, and it looks pretty convincing. So yeah, it's pretty amazing what's happened in the last 100 and whatever is it, 20 years. It's like basically it's like going not to the moon but to Mars in the equivalent of space exploration, as far as where we've gone from analog to digital.
Yeah, when you spoke about things going up in flames, I remember Flaherty lost all his footage when he went to shoot in the beginning.
Who was that? Sorry.
Yeah, it's Flaherty. He shot Nanook of the North.
Oh, yes.
He lost
okay.
all that footage. It went up in flames.
Yeah.
And then subsequently, of course, luckily for him, it worked out to his benefit, because then he learned and he reshot the whole thing. But imagine going back and reshooting everything, and that too in the North. Okay.
Well, I have a small story. Sorry to stop.
Yeah.
when we were shooting Little Terrorist, we were shooting in the camp in the desert with these sort of makeshift tents which had electrical, because we had to charge our batteries. So we were shooting a night side schedule, and the tent in which all our footage was lying caught fire.
Oh my
Uh,
God.
yes. So Little Terrorist almost didn't happen because there was no way we could have gone back to that
Well,
footage.
I'm glad it happened. It's a lovely film.
Thank you.
Ashwin, can I continue asking you, while the technological advancements equip us with great tools, can they help develop an artist's ability?
Oi, this is a double whammy. Okay. Um, I think so, yes and no. I think technological advancements certainly help us think of ways of doing things in a slightly different way. For example, I mean, I'll give you the most basic example: acting. Right. So acting used to be on a proscenium stage in a theater, where the actor would have to engage the audience for 2 hours, starting from the beginning to the end with an interval. And so there was a whole momentum and an arc, and that actor had to be in the moment for the entire time. Now, with the advent of cinema, that time became between action and cut, and usually not longer than maybe a minute maximum, maybe two minutes, and the longest takes that people like the great art director has done, when went on for 10 minutes, but that's mostly very unusual. So actors had to adapt, right? So they had to change their way of thinking about their role. Something that they are shooting like today, a scene that they're shooting today, they'd have to revisit it maybe 2 weeks later when other things were in place, and they would have to pick it up right where they. But in theater, that wasn't happening. In theater, they had to go from 0 to 100. So that is a way in which actors had to, for example, adapt, and very similarly, editors have had to do the same. Cinematographers have had to do the same. Directors have had to do the same. So I don't know if it sort of it helps develop the artist's ability. I think it certainly creates more of limitations and also places that the artist can sort of explore further. And yeah, I think it just pushes you to think creatively. I think basically being creative is all about putting limitations on yourself. I mean, like, it's the whole idea of bandish, as you have in the Indian classical music. You have a rag, and within the rag you can only hit a few notes, but you have to do your magic within those notes. You can't just fly into whatever you want and just sing whatever you like. So in a similar way, I think technology gives you both the release as well as the bandish within which you have to operate, and that just forces you to be more creative.
Sooni, there are various components that go into the making of a good image, and these have changed over the years, evolved over the years, both from the perspective of a practitioner and a consumer. Could you talk about that?
Sure. My heroes and the people I loved have stayed the same. The kind of photographs I love to take and see have stayed the same, which is basically I love Bresson, Brasai, Raghuveer Singh, Raghurai, for want of a better word, documentary, street photography. Now that is not so much in fashion anymore. It's all conceptual. Basically what I love is seeing an image and being able to see it without any words, without any explanations, without any grand concepts, without any theories. I like to see an image that is well made, that stands on its own as an image. And these days there's very little of that because everything is so conceptual and everything is explained and everything comes with text. So in that sense, I think things have changed. Also, image making now has become a very powerful tool for propaganda. And with social media and with the manipulation of the image and with digital technology, it's all a very almost dangerous kind of combination for propaganda to go viral, which it has been doing everywhere in India, in America, WhatsApp forwards, fake photos, fake news. And that's a part of image making today.
Could you also talk about how the consumption of the image has evolved and changed over the years? How do consumers today engage with the images being produced, distributed, even appropriated or reappropriated through digital approaches, in the social media?
In the old days, it used to be the camera never lies. Now everyone knows the camera always lies. That's
Nice
the
one.
basic difference. And in terms of social media, as you said, there's no ownership of images. So as a photographer, if you're, I think my children kind of find me a little anachronistic when I insist on, if someone uses my image, I want my credit photo by, because that concept doesn't exist anymore. I think the ownership of photographs are free for all.
Okay. Samar, nowadays we see a distinct difference between a captured image and the final produced image. Can you discuss this within the context of originality? I mean, where's the
Well, yeah,
artist's originality?
right, right. There was, as what Sooni said earlier, that let's say documentary, forget commercial work, documentary, there were people like, Raghuveer or so many of them who did things which were, their vision. Today, you can research anything across on the net and you can recreate that image. So I think the era of purist is definitely over, because I think that's especially when you are looking at sharing space. If you want to do it for yourself, that's very different. I also want to talk earlier what Ashvin was talking about, the usage of technology. I think whether it's photography, film, music, name it, any of these formats, platforms where tech has come in, I think the best thing has happened is that you're not stressing over, the mechanics of it. Today there is a lot more room for you to put your vision without getting caught up in, what f-stop or, what exposure or whatever. Because yes, technology is there to rescue it, to stitch it up, whatever needs to be done. And I think that is probably a very huge shot in the arm, because I think that really helps you sticking to the storytelling, and not so much about did the film get exposed right or not. I mean, of course, I come from old school, like, all of us here, we've been coming from, from analog space. But I think for newer photographers who haven't seen, and, what am I going to tell them about history of photography? And like, I spent like, 2 days trying to get this shot of this elephant coming from there. I mean, big deal, you did it. No one's interested in my war stories. Fair enough. Right now, the guy can shoot it in the zoo and he can actually drop a forest in the back and it's there. And the consumers are just looking at that. They're not looking at, did you almost get killed by the elephant, if you know what I mean.
Ashwin, how do you think technology has enabled us to completely change the definition and fundamental concept of the image in this context? For example, the image is no longer what it captured, just the moment, but what is produced after altering settings and digital inputs and processing, post-processing, etc.
Well, I think just to feed off what Sooni has been saying all this while, I think it has made a lot of things which were outside the purview of the most expensive movies, for instance. I mean, she took the example of a drone. I took the example of VFX. Even a medium budget film, low budget film can now think in terms of doing things which it could not have thought of even 5-7 years ago, because they would not have been credible. They would not have worked. They would not have been possible budget wise, etc. So I think technology certainly has managed to help us save a lot of the sort of money that went into creating things, and then we can then therefore start dreaming about films and about settings and things like that, which were very recent till very recently very much out of the scope of this kind of stuff that we would normally be able to do. So that is certainly a fundamental shift. I mean, for example, if I wanted to recreate period Calcutta in the 1830s or 1890s, I would pretty much just have to go down to the street that I wanted to recreate and digitally wipe out the hoardings, etc. Do a certain amount of good set design, but not over the top. But if I wanted to do it at the time of merchant ivory, I would have to mobilize an entire army and shut down the whole place for God knows how many weeks before all the carpenters got to work and fixed it, right? So we can do all of that stuff in digital. So hence we can dream bigger, I think. We can dream about things that we've never been able to do. And I think a lot of the times when I think of period or recreating a period, I think we can start doing that. Ironically, again, if I think recreating a period film today is way simpler for lower budget filmmakers than it would have been, for example, for somebody 10, 15, 20 years ago. And that's just one sort of genre, if you like. There are so many genres. There's sort of sci-fi, there's fantasy, there's magical realism, and so on and so forth. So I think it makes a lot of things accessible. And so we can dream bigger, and within the same limitations, we can dream even bigger and bigger. And I think the whole idea is for us to dream and for people to sort of watch our dreams. And I think as long as technology is pushing us along that river, it's doing a great job. So, yeah.
Okay, Sooni, how do you see the role of technology in film and photography evolving over the next decade? Do you think it'll play a larger role in these two visual disciplines? Or do you feel there'll be a shift towards more orthodox and manual approaches and practices?
I think it's going to be unrecognizable as far as technology goes. Maybe there won't be airtight compartments like this is a photograph, this is a film. Who knows where technology is going? Maybe you'll be able to take a photograph by just blinking, for example. Or, it's impossible to predict where technology is going. I mean, it's the level of futuristic kind of sci-fi right now. But as far as going back to older technologies, again, in my own life, my daughter was studying at Cornell and she started with 35 millimeter film photography because ironically, you can get film and, they had a dark room. And she was waking me up every morning with her images of contact sheets. And now she's been using all my old 120 millimeter cameras and my old film Leica. So it's inevitable that it won't be, I don't think it'll be a mass movement, but I don't think it's going to disappear. In terms of films, I'm not so sure. It was such a quick shift. And it was so like slash and burn, the move from film in movies to digital in movies. As I said, I made Little Zizou in 35 millimeter, and a few years later, AdLabs called me and said to come and take my print. And when I went there, overnight, all the projectors were gone. Overnight, film was gone. Overnight, it was digital in terms of movies. So with the expense and the business model of movies, I'm not so sure. I'd like to say, large theatrical experiences will never die, but I'm not so sure, actually. I'd like it to happen, but I don't
know. It'll be nice if all of you answer these questions. Can you talk about the COVID? How has the COVID pandemic impacted the conceptual identity of the image and led to the documentation of more socially relevant and real life issues? Samar, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, I would say, because this is something which has happened globally and not in isolation, it has impacted, as we know, on every profession, especially, let's say, I would say about photography or as an artist. I think, there's a larger shift. I personally, and not necessarily everybody would have that, but I think, the checkmate it has given you, I think you do feel, you do connect to much more deeper things, which unfortunately, when you are on that treadmill of churning out images, art, whatever else you're doing with your skill as a practitioner, I think that has really given you a rethink. I personally, I know that I do, I've been doing it for past couple of years, but last 1 year, I have been very, very focused on working with children, working on, leadership program and working through arts, design, photography, film, all kinds of various tools. So I think it's a very personal thing, how you see it. But I think as an artist or as a creative person, probably you're a little bit more sensitive and maybe, hopefully you're gonna start thinking more of a collective. I think personally, I really strongly believe that that era of me, myself, and I, the artist, is, to begin, it was so overcrowded. Everybody's outperforming each other with another new idea. But I think if you're working with community or whatever it is, where the creative process becomes more of a collaboration, I think that's the way to go. I think for me, that's the biggest thing from this COVID experience.
Ashwin, what would you like to say something on this?
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic actually is unprecedented, and this is a bit of a redundant statement, but if we just think about it, it's the singular global kind of experience, the likes of which our world has never ever come across, simply because we have never been so connected, ever in the history, in the sort of romp of human civilization. When a collective experience has sort of resonated and gone across the entire world in such a sort of emphatic manner, and the whole thing is just shut down. So, because of air connectivity and because of the internet, we have all experienced the same thing, and not for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, but for an extended period of time. In fact, a full year, and it continues, right? And that kind of global common experience has only ever happened before in what I could describe as, the mythological texts, where, someone like Joseph Campbell found out that the myths of, the Hindu philosophy, the sort of Hindu pantheon have the same stages of the hero's journey as the Greek, as the Incas, as these American Indians, etc. And this common, universally shared experience, which is now distilled into the hero's journey that now everybody follows as screenwriting 101, has now got a new dimension, which is the pandemic. And it's not the COVID pandemic and the virus per se. It is the sort of human experience, the sort of common shared trauma that has come out of it. And it is a traumatic, deeply traumatic experience for many, many people. And of course, the sort of resonances that are going to come out of this trauma, we don't know: depression, mental health, etc., the least of them. So my point is slightly, actually, I'm going to go a little further than just the image and the digital image and the movie making industry and or the photo industries, to say that whatever stories that we are going to be telling each other here onwards is going to have this new mythological experience involved in it. But this new common shared trauma somehow has to be gestated into the mythologies of our society, our civilization. And today we are not a singular civilization scattered all over the world, Indian or a Chinese or a Japanese. We are a global civilization. And so for the first time ever, there has been a global civilization which has faced a global trauma. And that is where I think the stories are going to come out of, actually. Now, what those stories are going to be, of course, we have a plethora of creative people in the world who are going to gestate it for us, and we're going to see it. Hopefully, all of us here on this panel are going to be part of that march. But I think that's where we need to focus on when we talk about COVID-19 and what's coming out of it.
Sooni, can you make a...
I kind of beg to differ in terms of COVID making us, better human beings and more aware, etc. The commonality we're talking about is only for people who are connected on the internet. What COVID has done is it's shut us out, all of us, into our own individual spaces. Before COVID, we were out and about on the streets, interacting with people who didn't have internet, who are not like us. For 1 year, we've sat in our houses, and yes, we've interacted with the migrants, but all in a secondhand way. And the individual has come into focus more, I think, during COVID time. Individual traumas, how do you cope? You bake, you do this, you do that, all of that. So I, for one, am just waiting for everyone to get out and about into the real world again.
Yes, Sooni, I kind of agree with you. Even as I take online classes, I'm really not happy doing that. It's very, very second-hand. It's not like being in the classroom. Okay, now next question again to all of you. Do you think that the pandemic will result in the creation of new technologies as a response to the issues of social distancing, remote working, etc.? For example, tech that supports remote functions, enhanced artificial reality, virtual reality, and so on.
Of course, but I don't think it's a result of the pandemic. It's a result of technology marching forward relentlessly. It doesn't have to do with the pandemic. Maybe it'll get speeded up, but it's always was going to go there.
Ashvin?
No, not really. Kind of, I'm with Sooni there actually. Kind of almost exactly what she just said. Really not the result of the pandemic at all.
Samar?
Yeah, well, I don't have anything different to say. It's all driven by market forces, so it's really simple. If there has to be social distancing, they'll put a Zoom 2.8, and if it is, so it's all related to the environment we live in. Tech guys, it's all a marketing space. You just gotta create a new. There was a time even a year back, if you wanted to have somebody on a Skype call, and they'd be like, I don't do Skype. And today everybody is there on a Zoom, and it's like your eyeballs are falling out, but you're still there because that's the only way to do it.
Yeah.
There are about 15 questions from the audience. It's been sent to you on WhatsApp, or they're also on the Q&A box. But in case you want the panelists to first do their closing remarks before you go into the questions, you can do that after. Alternately, two things I have to, just hearing your conversation, the two things which came to my mind was, one is talking about collaboration, COVID, non-COVID. Technology obviously is not new in this lockdown, in continuation to the COVID question. It's been around. Zoom was around. It wasn't invented in March during the lockdown. But people have, as Samar rightly said, people have now just, a Zoom is like a phone call. Previously, Skype, or even in March or April, if you ask somebody to join a Zoom, they said, no, my software, my computer will get encrypted. All those funny stories came out with some. But the point is, how has we've always, through Avid, we've kind of probed the idea of collaboration and also education. So in the concept of the changing face of the image, could you all just talk about the aspect of collaboration, how it's changed also in COVID, and also the area of education? Because previously, everybody went to film school. They studied photography. Now, because technology is so easy, a lot of people are self-taught, and I'm not dissing being self-taught, but there is something to be said about putting going through that rigorous training. So those two buckets, I'd love to hear your thoughts on.
Shall I start?
Yeah.
Sooni?
Asad, I'm a totally untrained photographer and screenwriter and filmmaker. I believe in education, not training. So if you have a broad-based education, which I did, which encompassed a lot of things, I think, for me at least, that is better than training. Because very often, for instance, if you train as a screenwriter, you end up learning formulas, or formulas that someone else came up with, usually Hollywood and America. And I'm violently against those formulas. So that's my take on it.
Okay.
Collaboration?
Nice.
Collaboration is the same COVID and pre-COVID. Filmmaking is the classic example of a collaboration. When it works well, it works brilliantly. And when it doesn't work well, it's a miserable experience. Luckily for me, it's worked really well. And that will happen whether we were in lockdown or not. Many films were made during lockdown, or they did post during lockdown, and they were collaborating, but they were just collaborating over Zoom and over the computer, which is actually not as quick or as nice as personal interaction. Everyone I spoke to who worked during the lockdown like this are just dying to get back, to physical interaction.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sooni.
And it's also much slower. It's much quicker when you're opposite a person and you're talking rather than, trying to explain to each other over a computer.
Ashvin, would you like to make your concluding remarks?
No, I'm good. I think there are a bunch of questions, so I'll be happy to answer those actually.
Okay, I'll go to Samar if he has any concluding remarks to make.
Yeah, well, all I would say as a creative person in my own practice, the days of your individuality about that how brilliant you are as an artist or whatever your creative process is, I think we need to give it a rest. I think it's about collaboration in a different education space where you share your knowledge, whether it's online or otherwise, and you address those. And I really believe, because there's no point in running around, and I mean, no point in the sense these are very expensive schools to go to, film school and art school or design photo school or whatever you want to do. I think there's lots of knowledge you get. Sooni very rightly said, it's your exposure on all other things. What are you interested? History, reading, philosophy, whatever else, and that's what really reflects on your work finally. Ashvin knows, I mean, as I remember all these years, you have such keen interest in music, classical music, so these are the elements which actually, it's after all, it's all symphony, right? I mean, creativity is a symphony. It's about what all do you bring to it,
Okay, shall we go to the questions? Okay. Okay, here's a question for Sooni. What is their approach to delegation? I don't know. I don't understand.
In a filmmaking context,
I suppose.
See, I believe what I read Woody Allen's once said. He said, he's supposed to have said, that hire the best person for the job and then let them do their job. So that has been my philosophy on both the films I've made. And I try and keep out of the way. I try and not hamper something good that's happening. And at the same time, still try to be in control of the whole thing and not let it get out of hand. So I do delegate a lot.
Okay, this is for Ashvin.
Mm-hmm.
What do you love about directing?
Oh, well, I love the idea that I can think up of something out of the ether, and then that actually moves a whole bunch of people and moves them emotionally. And that for me is the sort of pip of the, that's what really sends me. Actually, that's why I do what I do. I mean, I believe it's my job to emotionally not just engage, but to give people a sort of almost a cathartic, if you like, experience somehow, positive, negative, whatever it might be. So yeah, that's what I love about directing. Using music, because directing touches on all the performing and some of the visual arts. So movement, music, dance, acting, set design, costume design. All of these are elements that sort of create this illusion, or invite you to suspend your disbelief in this sort of cocoon, within which then emotionally you face states of rapture and states of ecstasy. And I think that's what my whole thing is really. That's what sends me. So
What do you think about storytelling through still images? Where does that stand in today's scenario?
I love storytelling in still images, and I've seen it done really well over the years, and I don't see it kind of dying out today either. I think it's a wonderful way to tell a story.
Would anyone else like to answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree exactly. I think it's a very powerful piece of whatever you want to call it. One still image. It can say a lot, I think. And it's a really I would say it's a very powerful tool if you have the right messaging.
This is from someone who says, Mr. Vaguely Clear. We talk about analog dying, or at least being driven to the fringes. But there's something to think about how even when the physicality of the analog is in jeopardy, the aesthetic of the film remains hanging over our visual culture. We find this with people using filters over digital images to mimic the film look of 18 millimeter, I suppose you mean 16 millimeter, and so forth for their Instagram uploads. Does that mean there is a yearning for how the photographs of analog film look versus the digital counterpart? I think that's a nice question.
I think that's true.
Mm.
There is a lot of wanting to have the look of film. Um, yeah.
And that's also our only
Yeah.
context, really. I mean, the context we have is coming from celluloid, coming from the world of photochemical processes. So that's the context. So there will be I mean, for example, for instance, find digital very hard. The image I find, I mean, I'm constantly trying to soften the image, soften the lines, soften everything. My entire post process is just trying to strip down the hardness of the image and try to put grain, put noise on the image to make it look more organic somehow, so which is again trying to mimic a look that we have grown up with, of course, the 35 millimeter softness that you get over lines, of course, people's heads and things like that, so your backlight doesn't like pop out, like make the actor pop out of the back of the frame, so everything's just soft and nicely sort of blended in. So I mean, I in fact in some ways try to degrade my images in some senses because it's too clean. It's too synthetic in some senses. I find it very hard. So yeah.
But I think it's an aesthetic and a taste.
Sure. Yeah, well, that's what I'm talking about, my aesthetic, but I mean, but I'm trying to say that, you can do stuff like that. So you do yearn in some senses for the nostalgia, which is what the gentleman's trying to say.
So it's my aesthetic too, but what I'm saying is that for certain people, the digital image where everything is in focus works really well. And for them, that's magical. It's like, going from pre-flash days to flash days where flash would illuminate everything and make it flat. And for some people, that was a wonderful aesthetic. Not for me, but for some people that was. So I guess it depends.
When we see images with all this, grainy stuff and, edges burnt out and all that. Now, it all depends on who your practitioner, who your audience is. If you're coming from analog space, obviously I want to look like, so I do every picture with a black frame, though it's digitally and all that stuff. But most of people are doing where largest consumption happens is in social media. It's mostly about creating another effect. I don't think there is so much of love about, I miss those grainy images of those days when I used to shoot on film. I think it's a lot to do with is like, okay, what's the new effect out there? Let me try this out. And I think that's mostly the audience working out there, practitioners, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Has improved technology taken away from the true art and skill of a photographer, filmmaker? Does it negatively impact the conceptual identity of an image as well as its reception among audiences?
I again want to answer this with a personal example. Yes, it does. Older technology, you needed to have more skills, for sure. You needed to know more craft. But just because that is not there doesn't necessarily make you, a better or a worse photographer. For instance, my father started photography when there were like 4 frames in a roll. Then it went to 6 frames, then it went to 36, and it was like, wow, 36 frames in a roll, from no light meters and judging the light, to handheld light meters, to light meters inbuilt in your camera, manual focus to autofocus. All these things, you needed less skill. But it's inevitable that everything that happens in the future is going to change is inevitable. There's no hanging on something and saying that time was the purest time, or that time, you needed. Yeah, you did need a lot more skill, actually. When you think of Rasai, when he took pictures at night in very darkly lit spaces, like in these holes in the wall where, couples were. And he took them with a huge camera on a tripod. And you wonder how he did it. Because even you with your small camera, find it difficult doing the same. So yes, I go back. You did need a lot more skill in that kind of instance.
Okay, the next question is for Ashvin. It's from Tapadia. Hi, Mrinal. I think I know you. Ashvin, within the analog medium, Could you please describe the shift from nitrate to cellulose film? Obviously, there was a need since nitrate was extremely flammable, but how did the trend of adopting cellulose become commonplace? Yeah, Ashwin, go.
I think the question is answered itself. Just because it was highly flammable. I mean, silver nitrate was extremely flammable. It was very very difficult. It was like having fireworks, a box of Diwali crackers inside your thing. But even cellulose was flammable. I mean, it was not till much later. I think it was 19. What is it? 23 or something, that 16 millimeter came out with some sort of safe film. And but even till then, even then the it was heat sensitive and it would catch fire. So obviously the shift simply happened because of practicality. Nobody wants their theaters and their property burnt down. I mean, that's how the shift happened, and it was adopted because it was just safer. That's it.
Next question is Prabhat Singh. As Samar put it, that because of manipulations, audiences have stopped believing in images. What does he think of the future of photojournalism? As film goers, we know the truth about flying cars or kicks, but believed a Robert Capa image or Cartier-Bresson. Samar, please answer that. I have no idea.
Yeah. Okay. No. I think what one is, I mean, the person wants to know that what's gonna, I mean, will we have the kappas of the world again? Because today there is, there's no trust in images because of manipulation. But I give you the other side to it, is that there was a time when, you had to send a photographer to take that picture, whatever that event was. Let's say journalism, for example. Today, anybody can take that picture, and I'm not talking about that other side, what we discussed earlier about the fake images and all that. I mean, the fake news and all that. That's a different side to it. But today, a photographer, because everybody has the technology, the camera on their phone and all that, they can instantly shoot. Let's say if there is an accident on the street, there's a building on fire, and you shoot and you can upload it, and it can be hashtagged, and before the photographer actually takes the car and comes to that point, the building is already down. So I think that has speeded up. There's no doubt about it. You're talking about people like Kappa and all that. They were really masters. They really inspired. And I think earlier we were talking about was history of picture making, why it is important. Because I think there's a lot of learning from that. Not about copying the images, how it was shot, but I think there is a lot of inspiration of how these people approach their images. And it was not just about that he was at D-Day, they landed up at the right time or whatever, but it's so much to do with their approach of actually making those pictures in the larger context of whatever was going on at that time.
Okay, next question. Good evening, sir. This is Ankit Ranjan, sorry. Please throw light on the possibilities of alternative photography in the digital age.
Yeah, well, I can speak on that. What I believe is, as technology keeps getting better and better and whatever, I think there will always be, and I'm not talking about somebody like me who comes from analog space. I think there are a lot of, new practitioners who actually would like to go back and work on, like, if you recall when, black and white was around and color came, everybody ran to color picture making. And then there were people who wanted black and white photographs. There are people who want to go back into the darkroom, people who want to go and work on, all the earlier practices of how prints were made. So I think there always will be that space, maybe not in that kind of numbers, but and of course it's going to be expensive too, because setting up dark rooms, chemicals, all that stuff is not that cheap, and there are not many manufacturers for that. So it's like reviving of Polaroid. Why does Polaroid have to come back? There's and the damn thing with Polaroid fades away after a little while in any case. But Polaroid is back because there are enough people out there who would love to. And this is not about 100-year-old me who started a long time back. We are talking about young people who are interested in working on traditional practices.
Yeah, I know a lot of my students are very keen to work with cinema, with film. They want to shoot on film. They enjoy it. Okay, next question. How much is image making technical or craft driven as opposed to experimental or inspiration driven? Sooni?
It can be both. I mean, it depends on your sensibility. You could be a very technical photographer. You could be a more intuitive photographer who's inspired, who experiments. So it could be both. It's not either or.
Okay. Sanjay Kharwa faces this problem. I face this problem that there is no opportunity for street photographers. Sooni, you can continue, I think, or Samar, whatever.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think it's unfortunate.
So there's
You know, in the old days, we had picture magazines, we had Illustrated Weekly, we had, you know, the image was given a lot more importance and it was privileged in news. It's not the case anymore. So it is a tough situation, I think.
So can I throw some light on this? You know, what I believe is what digital has done is everybody's a photographer to begin with, as we know. Next thing is that earlier you had to be top of that pyramid with that great camera and film and all that stuff, and you got published. Most of people never got to it. What digital has done is, because everybody's a photographer, and what I say is there's huge amount of noise out there today. But the good part is that, you know, there are many platforms where you can actually today share your stuff on, you know, on digital space, the Instagrams and all that, which has given you a platform and opportunity to actually share what you do. Now, if your digital noise is right kind of noise, you will always have audience and they will follow you, and that's how you would grow. You know, I think that's, and that's the reason why anybody can be a photographer, because, you know, it's your storytelling, whatever that is. Because obviously the days of print, very rightly what Sooni said, you know, those days are over, you know, because of various reasons, mainly budgets, obviously, they don't have the money for it. But I think, you know, for young people, there is this huge amount of universe out there to showcase their work, you know, billions of images being poured in, no doubt about it. But at the same time, there's so many more platforms to share stuff, to hashtag and all that. And if you have a powerful story, you don't need to go to a photo school. You know, your picture is really your inside, what you're thinking, you know, what you're processing. And technique is easy. I mean, you know, don't waste your time on going to photo school. I always tell that. Go to a philosophy or go to art history, because that's where your images will evolve out of you, rather than just going and learning another skill set, you know.
But Samar, sharing is all very well, but how do you make a living as a street photographer? Can you these days?
No, but yeah, so no, you're very right about it. But then, as a photographer, can you make money today? I think, you know, that question is a larger question on everything, right? So like people talk about commercial photographers. I mean, I tell people that if photography is your passion, you know, don't kill it by making a living out of it, because what you'll do is you'll end up hating that. And they're very, you know, it's very fortunate that you have a passion, because unfortunately the treadmill doesn't let any kind of passion last in life. So, you know, keep that as a passion, weekend photography. And it's not about, you know, about making money or what kind of name you want to make out of it. But I think, you know, and, you know, you are a very good example. You make pictures not because you wanted to do a book or you wanted to do cinema or whatever, because you love the idea of being a storyteller. And you've taken this tool to say it, you know. And I think that still remains. I think that still remains with a lot of people. Commercially, yes, but I think that disruptive thing has happened technology-wise everywhere. And I wish I could. So I tell a lot of photographers that if maybe go shoot weddings, maybe you make more money on that, and then go do your weekend pictures, whatever else you like doing, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll move to the next question. This is for Ashvin. With the advent of transmedia storytelling, what are the changing dynamics in shaping the ideas of the director and structuring narratives for a cohesive user experience?
Okay, well, I'm assuming transmedia storytelling is crossing over from graphic design to fashion to photography to film. I mean, so I'm going to answer it from that point of view. Again, I think we are focusing on the wrong end. We're focusing on the tail and not on the head of the problem. I mean, well, there is no problem really, but we're focusing on the wrong end of the animal here. These are tools, we keep saying that. And the craft is the craft. And the point of the exercise is to tell a story and to move an audience emotionally. So if, I don't know, transmedia experience does that effectively, and in a way that an audience is engaged, so be it. And directors should certainly embrace it. But I frankly, when everything is reduced to this size, I find it a bit of a leap is to try and understand what beyond the frame we can actually be looking at. I mean, are we talking about a live and cinematic experience together? Are we talking about a theatrical and cinema experience together, etc.? And whether this is always going to be in the realm of experimentation, because what has certainly happened is that the element of live has sort of become less and less perhaps impactful, and we are dominated by the sort of images that are pouring out of these devices. So whatever transmedia means, it needs to restrict itself in fact, it needs to restrict itself to the device rather than, you think that you have an interdisciplinary possibility. Technologically, today, everything is possible. It's possible to integrate a fashion event with a sort of live music event, with a cinematic event, with with a sort of, a holistic storytelling event. I remember going to watch a performance of Macbeth, in which it was performed in an old warehouse over 6 floors, and it was all silent and just movement and physical actors, and you were thrown from an elevator into a dark space, and suddenly a scene from Macbeth would be enacted. And you had to actually piece together the entire thing, and you never watched the entire play. You were just watching little scenes, and of course they were just relying on the fact that you knew the story well enough for you to figure out what was going on. In fact, that was not even the point. The story was never the point, actually, in that performance. So when we start moving into things like that, yes, I suppose we can talk about transmedia and stuff, but we just talk about storytelling, which is actually the underpinning behind this question. I think stories need to be told, like I said, to move an audience emotionally and to be able to form some kind of cathartic experience between the person who's telling the story and the audience that's receiving it. And so if transmedia is what is creating that, then so be it.
We've got just about 7 minutes. I'm wondering if I should omit certain. Anyway, I'll just go till I come. How to deal with photography in confined spaces? Do you want to answer that, Sooni, Samar?
Sooni, go for it.
Again, how do you deal with it, I guess? I've not been able to deal with it very well, in the sense that I've not really taken many photos in my confined spaces during the lockdown. I know that people have, and they've been inspired. I don't know what else to say, how to answer this question.
Okay, let's just go to the next question. What do you think is the scope for fusion of old and new school filming in the modern era?
Well, simple thing is just carry your story through. Doesn't matter new school, old schooling.
I think we've been banging on about that for the whole session, really. It's
Okay. Then which photographers, cinematographers are your favorite or have served as an inspiration for you?
Oh boy, everybody answer that one by one.
That perhaps could be a good closing time to wrap up the conversation also. Sooni?
Okay, my favorite photographers are Bresson, Bresai, Robert Frank, Diane Arbus, Raghuveer Singh, Raghu Rai, my friends Ketaki Sheikh, Pablo Bartholomew, and then the Singh, and Samar Jodha. And my favorite cinematographers are Stararo. His name escapes me, but I'm sorry, I'm growing old. I defer to Samar or Ashvin.
Okay.
Darius Khonji, and the cinematographer of, anyway, pass.
Say the name of the film.
Yeah. Which film has he shot?
He shot many films.
But
I'll come. Please go ahead. I'll come back to
who
it.
was the director? Who did he
I'll
shoot?
come back to it.
Okay, Samar.
Yeah, I think Sooni very rightly put down all those great names out there, so I won't bore you by repeating it. But if there is any inspiration in creative space, I would say, it's painting for me and painters. And I think two of my favorite painters, which are really conflicted, one is Francis Bacon and the other one is Bosch. And I think I find these two from two different times of our lives. They have really shaken up a lot of stuff. It's not that I do that kind of work, but it's really inspiring to see. And this is, I keep telling a lot of young people who come for photo advice, what school and college they need to go. And I keep telling them, that go to art school, because that's where you're going to get inspired, not the skills, as I said earlier.
Ashvin.
Well, okay, two silos. Filmmakers to learn from, unequivocally, Hitchcock. He puts his technique right on the screen, and it's great to learn from him. Favorite filmmakers of all time is the person who inspired me to start making films, Abbas Kiarostami. And then Giuseppe Torrido, who made Cinema Paradiso that I just referred to a little earlier. So these are the two filmmakers, particularly for their ability to be able to use children in a way that is just the most evocative. But yeah, to learn. I mean, I've learned most of my cinema from Hitchcock. A lot of the stuff that I've learned from him. It's just he's just. Oh, and of course, sorry, how can I forget the silent artists? I mean, Buster Keaton, Jacques Tati, Charlie Chaplin. Not watching them for so much for the humor, which is fantastic, but also watching them for what they did with every movie. They were changing the way the story is told, what the medium can and cannot do. And I just don't mean technically, I mean the audacity of the kind of stories they were picking up and the fact that they could actually tell stories. So it went from single burlesque mime acts to entire stories like City Lights, coming on the screen, which is phenomenal for the sort of equipment that they had and the kind of limited way in which they could move the camera, or rather not move the camera, which was the size of a truck in those days. So yeah, for all those reasons.
Asad.
Emmanuel Lubezki.
Asad, would you like to wind up? There's just 1 minute more.
Sure. But thank you all for sharing such wonderful insights and perspectives. It took me back to when I started my career in New York in advertising. My first account was Minolta, and I launched the first digital camera for Minolta. And it was, I think, 10 frames per second. And we thought, wow, this is a technology innovation. And my last gig in New York was with Verizon, where we were about to launch, they called it the iPhone killer, which was the BlackBerry, international BlackBerry. They thought the iPhone was going to go somewhere. So it's interesting to see how technology has changed the way we looked at images and has changed our lives as we move ahead. This has been a very, very interesting panel. Thank you so much for tuning in. Audience, thank you for all these wonderful questions. I wish we had more time to answer them. But when you have such a rock stars of a panelist, it is always daunting to get to all the questions. Stay tuned. We have as I mentioned, we have very interesting programs lined up for the rest of January also. Our next program is on Saturday the 23rd, and it's the art in the age of COVID with Ranjit Hoskote, followed by the power of prose, writing and healing in the times of COVID. I think both our next sessions have the COVIDian lens on it, but just so to see what we've learned from it, not so much as to lament. But do find out more. Tune in to our website or follow us on our social media. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and remember that learning never stops. Thank you so much, guys. Pleasure.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.